Welcome to the Impact Summit Series, Data and Analytics event. This is the fourth in a series of events powered by GSA's Technology Transformation Services, also known as TTS. We're very excited to have so many of you join us today. I'm Kristina Britt, the Marketing and Outreach Lead for Solutions here at TTS. While we'll cover a few housekeeping notes in just a minute, please introduce yourself, name, agency, and what brought you here today in the chat window. Now on for the housekeeping. Everyone is automatically muted, so if you have questions, please type them in the chat box, and we'll answer as many as we can in the Q&A sessions. Also, we're recording today's session, and we'll post it to the event page along with other resources you'll see shared here today. A link to the live captioning for this event will be provided in the chat as well. Please make sure you're abiding by the TTS Code of Conduct throughout our time together. And for our media friends with inquiries, please email press@gsa.gov with the topic you'd like to talk about and your deadline. As you can see from our agenda, we have a number of great stories to tell. We hope today will bring insight into how government agencies can leverage data to support agency missions. Now I'll pass things over to Alexandra Porter, the Data and Analytics Lead at TTS, to kick off today's event.
Thank you, Kristina, and welcome. Thank you all so much for joining. Really appreciate it. So today we'll be focusing on data and analytics in government and the impact of our TTS partners in this space. The goal is to equip federal agencies with the data and analytics tools, services, and platforms to optimize operations, aid decisions, and engage the public. We'll hear from agency leaders across the federal government about their experience harnessing their data assets, and data infrastructure to support the delivery of mission functions. Today's stories will include supporting elements from TTS programs, including 18F, Centers of Excellence, Presidential Innovation Fellows, Data.gov, and the Digital Analytics Platform. So before we get started, we'd love to hear first from you via the Zoom poll. So you'll see a poll pop up. If you don't see it, or since you may not be viewing your browser, please put your response to the question here in the chat. So we're curious, what's the primary goal for your organization? Is it to foster data culture, optimize current data infrastructure, implement more advanced analytics such as AI, ML, or RPA prototyping, or strengthen employee data science and advanced analytics skill set? I'll give everyone a little bit of time to respond. Okay, so it looks like we have some splits across the board, but we have kind of highest on folks' list is fostering data culture, followed by optimizing current data infrastructure and implementing more advanced analytics, and then strengthening internal skill sets. So thank you again for that, and we'll get into a little bit of this throughout our event. So now I'm going to go ahead and hand things over to Ted Kaouk to keynote the event. So Ted serves as the Chief Data Officer at the United States Department of Agriculture. In his role, he's responsible for developing strategies that enable USDA to fully leverage its data as a strategic asset, improving organizational decision-making and outcomes for citizens. He was also selected as the first chair for the newly formed Federal Chief Data Officer Council. Ted?
Well, good afternoon, everyone. I'm excited to be able to engage with you, and what a great poll to start off with, thinking about all those various aspects that agencies are engaging in with the federal data strategy. Great to have an opportunity to talk to you a little bit about a couple aspects about the Federal CDO Council, and also a little bit about our journey at USDA over the past couple of years. So we'll go to the first slide here, and one of the things we just wanted to make folks aware of was the Federal CDO Council. Under the Evidence Act, there were a number of positions that were established for agencies, one of them being the Chief Data Officer, as well as statistical officials and evaluation officer. Also part of the Evidence Act was the Federal CDO Council, establishing this body to work on government-wide best practices for sharing data, for encouraging data sharing agreements, and really improving how we use data as a strategic asset and for the production of evidence. So as those agencies have been establishing those CDO positions this year, we've also been standing up the council. And so we have worked together on a vision for leading really transformational change that improves the nation's ability to leverage our data as a strategic asset. With all of those new CDOs being established for the first time across government, we really feel that the CDO Council's work will be most effectively advanced by really developing a vibrant learning community that ensures these CDOs have the resources and best practices to lead data-driven change. So some of the things that we're working on are on the next slide. We're really working to share all of the collective knowledge we have, leveraging best practices where we can find them, identifying cross-cutting opportunities that we can solve together, particularly during COVID-19. That's been a relevant engagement for us as the demand for data has been acute. Working to deliver data analytics solutions to our leaders and field employees. We really feel like together we can have a major impact on how federal agencies more efficiently and effectively serve the public. And thinking through some aspects of the federal data strategy, which was also released this year. Each agency is implementing 6 individual actions in FY20, and the POLA really kind of captures a lot of that in terms of thinking about the workforce, data governance, establishing data cataloging efforts, looking at our data management maturity. And so as agencies are doing that and CDOs are working on that, we are really excited about our ability to enable access to high quality, timely data that improves our evidence-based policymaking. And the federal data strategy really, really provides a really good foundational roadmap for us to do that in a consistent way across government. So while there's much work to do, I think the focus on this is really exciting. And one of the aspects that I wanted to just briefly share with everyone today is how do we take all of those various activities that are happening and turn them into a business-driven approach at agencies. I think CDOs, as we're having conversations, we're all thinking about how we engage with our agencies to add value. And so over the past few years, this is part of the conversation that we've had at the Department of Agriculture. So I wanted to share just a couple of the things that we have worked on across these various aspects of what's now the federal data strategy to improve access to data and to enable us to make better decisions. So I'm going to focus primarily on our enterprise analytics program, which we worked to stand up a little over 2.5 years ago. And on the next slide, I think some of the things that we engaged in should be familiar to most folks who have operated, especially in large federal agencies, where getting access to the right data, getting access to timely data, understanding the authoritative source of that data can be a challenge. And so at USDA, this is one of the kind of key areas that we honed in on our overall USDA business strategy, IT strategy, was really focused on how to solve some of these challenges. And so I want to just talk for a couple minutes today about that approach. The first aspect of that was giving it a lot of visibility and establishing it as one of our agency priority goals. So on the next slide, you'll see that we worked, so over that time, we've done a tremendous amount of work. And so just 2.5 years in, going from not having any analytics capabilities at the department, we have worked to develop 500 dashboards across each of our various mission areas, really work to give both our leaders and employees better access to information. So at the Forest Service, ensuring that our forest supervisors have an integrated view on things like timber sales, fuels treatment, and budget and HR all in one place. Ensuring that our operational leaders and scientists at the Office of Food Safety have access to more timely data around laboratory sampling across each and every one of our mission areas and across each and every one of our mission support functions like IT and HR. We worked to establish an enterprise platform, integrated that data, and made it available on a single platform. We've also worked to enable the organization to do training on data visualization and to assess our workforce, and also to put in place the right leadership to be able to implement across a large federal agency. So again, going back to just how did we get here from where we were, one of the key steps we took was really making it a priority for the department by establishing it as one of our agency priority goals for FY18 and 19. And so that started with the secretary. And on the next slide, you'll just have a quick view of what those goals were. We really wanted to make a concerted effort to make data more available to leaders across the department. So we worked both at USDA, and we also collaborated in a partnership with GSA Centers of Excellence on the data analytics side to really work over FY 2018 and 2019 to bring this to a reality at USDA. And that started by having our secretary and our leadership really engaged from the top all the way down. On the next slide, we'll talk a little bit about the approach that we used. So one of the things that we really found was having a human-centered approach. A lot of times when we started this effort, people didn't necessarily realize the insights that they could get access to. So there was a real move to move people quickly from suspicion and skepticism to hope and optimism is what we like to say. They didn't always realize that they could get better insights. And so part of our transformation was getting people in the room, getting leaders in the room. Here you actually see our deputy secretary and our sub-cabinet officials engaging at a very high level on the questions that matter to them. What were the key questions that they had? And one of the, I think the key takeaways that we had was moving people from thinking about what data they think they have access to really the best and biggest questions, and then using analytics, using the data that we have or data we might be able to get from other sources to be able to bring insights to those questions. Starting from that perspective was really, really valuable. So we worked in these divergent, convergent thinking exercises to hone in on the best questions. And then we would use a really iterative approach to developing offline dashboards, which we took back to leaders, continuing to refine them. And we also made visible where we had data quality issues. We made really clear that we were making available the best available data to answer those questions. Where we didn't have data we needed, we would put that in the backlog and document that for future activities. And in a lot of cases, the findings that we had created a shared opportunity that we had the data, but it might not have been available to those owners. And that led us in a direction of standing up a platform that could help us answer those questions. So going on to the next slide, we really focused on communication as well, documenting the usage of the dashboards, telling a story about how the various launches across our mission areas led into deeper engagement, establishing newsletters and getting that two-way feedback so we could, again, have a really business-driven approach to this adoption across the enterprise. Next slide. So where we are today, we've also tried to tell a story about where we're actually able to look across our mission areas to understand the impacts of COVID-19 on food supply chain, thinking about what our best available data is, blending those data sources, using AI and machine learning to actually save time. Things like our enterprise dashboards, where we have saved 400,000 hours because we're only creating one HR dashboard across 19 agencies as opposed to creating it 19 times individually. So really helping to communicate that story and also thinking about how that impacts the future of our activities for the department. Something we're really excited about. And as we're kind of nearing the end of time here, we'll go to the next slide. So although we started with the dashboards, one of the really key takeaways that we had was, again, visualizing that data, getting people excited about what was possible. But then on the back end, as we gained that excitement and people wanted more of it, we really did hone in on educating people about the fact that the insights that we were able to provide to them were actually a product of data management practices we had in place. And in areas where we needed to improve, were an opportunity for us to deliver even more insights in the future. So we've started to connect more broadly through our data governance board, how the insights we provide are actually dependent on our analytics workforce, our data management practices, and governance. And so we've stood up a governance board this year to help us support continuing to build upon this effort for the future. We've also established assistant chief data officers in each of our mission areas. We can go to the next slide, to help provide the leadership that's necessary for us to focus on our data. So we have a very large agency with 19 agencies, 8 mission areas. Just one of our mission areas is rural development, and it's the sixth or seventh largest lender in the country, just in terms of its portfolio size. We really needed these assistant chief data officers to be in place as partners to their CIOs, but to report to the business, to be able to align to a governance approach across the department that enables centralized analytics teams of the department to answer questions that matter to everybody, for questions that matter to each of those mission areas to be answered by those centralized analytics teams. And for that assistant chief data officer to establish their own governance boards that roll up to the department strategy and having their own data strategy. So really excited about how we have been able to build on a culture. I think that was one of the polling questions. That's really what we're focused on, is building that culture. Of course, the technology and the platforms and all of the other aspects of our data strategy are important, but fundamentally it's about raising the expectations of the kinds of questions that people are asking, and then building behind that the workforce and the technology and the tools that are needed to get there. So happy to be able to provide just a quick update, an overview of the CDO Council and the work that we've done at USDA, and looking forward to the rest of the afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ted. It was really interesting learning about the CDO Council as well as what you've achieved at USDA. So thank you so much for sharing that information with us.
Great, thank you.
Next up, we have a fireside chat with Sachin Shah at USDA, which will be moderated by Gina, Valo. Gina is a Presidential Innovation Fellow at the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, where she supports the agency's Technology Modernization Action Plan through projects focused on unlocking the potential of internal and external data sources. Gina, over to you.
Thanks, Kristina, and thank you, Ted, as well. I know that the USDA dashboards have been a source of inspiration at FDA over the last year and in the development of our Chief Data Officer role as well. So thanks for your inspiration. It's my pleasure today to introduce you to Sachin Shah. He is the Program Manager for Insight Time Reporting, which is an enterprise activity-based time reporting program for the U.S. Food and Drug Administration. Sachin has extensive experience in strategy, HR, and marketing, and before coming to FDA, he led an HR reorganization at the Department of Health and Human Services and has held other positions in the private sector. I'm very excited to be with you here today, Sachin. Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Gina. For those of you, here today, thank you very much for your time. We appreciate that you're here and looking forward to a lively and robust conversation. Let me first start with the next slide and a little bit about the FDA. Everybody's heard of this, but many people don't know what our responsibilities are. So I thought I'd just share that with you. This is direct from our mission statement. And as you can see, we're a public health agency, and we focus on a variety of products, obviously food and drugs break down into various things, and including things like medical devices, which range from the humble tongue depressor at the doctor's office all the way up to state-of-the-art scanners and products that emit radiation in food and so on. So you can see that we have a lot of responsibility in our portfolio. We regulate about 20 cents of the consumer dollar, just to give you an idea of the context of the FDA. On the next slide, I'm going to talk a little bit about sort of the background of our particular project. We collect more than $1.5 billion of human medical product user fees, and those are products like drugs, biologics, which are medicines based on living tissue, like vaccines, generic drugs and biosimilars, and medical devices. And this portfolio of fees has a bunch of rules around it, which include what you can and can't do with them, and they're all slightly different. And we also have appropriated funds. So managing all of this is increasingly complicated. And you can see over the last 25, almost 30 years, how this has grown from the prescription or new drugs program back in '92 all the way up to the present day. And FDA, we continue to collect and use these user fees to protect and promote public health. So specifically on the next slide, our mission was to build an activity-based time reporting program that really tracks staff time and staff effort against the various aspects of our mission, how much time is spent on new drugs versus how much time is spent on generic drugs and so on. And in the normal case, not an edge case, but a normal case, part of somebody's day may be spent on working on activities that are new drug focused, while another part of their day may be spent on administrative overhead activities, and yet another part of their day may be spent on something that covers multiple user fees, but is the same piece of work. So, what we're really trying to do is understand and tell the story of FDA's level of effort against our mission. And so this is obviously a very data-centric process. Over the years, we've continually improved our program, and we've made a number of changes, especially in the last round of modernization. But there's some lessons that we've learned along the way that I'd like to share with you here, and then in the next couple of slides as well. But I'm going to go through each one of these. First one is around building consensus. Before we even started writing the first contract, or bringing in the first technical solution, we spent a lot of time, almost 18 months, building consensus between our various centers within FDA, within the IT department, our Office of Information Management Technology, and then also the data scientists that have to use the data, and the policy staff. And the policy staff is really key here, because all of this data really goes against, are we meeting our policy goals? And so having their input was invaluable. So please, when you start to build your program, don't forget the policy folks. Even though they're not necessarily data centric, they definitely are key drivers in how you build your program. Another decision that we made early on was to collect our requirements for data explicitly alongside the technical and functional requirements. The reason for this is that data requirements are not immediately visible from the technical specs. They're really a separate set of requirements. As Ted talked about in his previous presentation, people don't always know what they know and don't know what they want. And so having conversations around, well, what do you want? How can this be used? What do we have already? And what else do we need to gather? Questions like that really go a long way towards designing an effective and streamlined program. We of course, and like everybody else, we use Scrum and Kanban and all that. And the idea here was to be iterative and scalable. Instead of launching a single agency-wide data solution, for 20,000 people, what we've done is we've done this by center, and we've rolled this out, over time. And given the ups and downs of the last couple of years, I'm really glad we did this. This allowed us to adapt to changing conditions. We did our first launch right after the government shutdown in 2019. We did our second launch right after COVID. I mean, literally, we were launching as people were transitioning to working from home, and we were still able to get the input and compliance that we needed in order to meet our policy goals. And the idea is to be iterative and scalable. Don't go for the big bang, but keep improving over time. Another thing is to return data for rapid analysis and validation. So we have a number of pre-canned reports and things like that. And one thing that we were able to do, because this is activity-based time reporting, is we really were able to return the data back to the user. So people could actually build their own insights into what their time is, what are they doing specifically, something they've never really had the probability of doing before. And what was nice about this is now that we're doing our performance evaluations, people are actually able to go back and see, hey, where did I put all that effort in 6 months ago that they, frankly, have forgotten about now? And we're actually able to track the level of effort we put against COVID as well in our COVID response, which has been immeasurably helpful, in, not just in terms of saying, hey, we're doing all this work, but also managing staff time, avoiding burnout and things like that. And then, another piece here is that, we need to continue support. The data project doesn't end with the dashboards. It doesn't end with the inputs. We really built an extensive support function, one to help people input data, but then also to get use of the data. We don't just end it after you hit submit, but there is this whole extensive sort of post-action support that we've continued to build. And I'll talk more about that, I think, in the next slide. So yes, what's happened as a result? There have been 4 major changes in the agency as a result of our transition into Insight. One, we were doing quarterly sampling basis of a limited number of staff in order to do our time reporting. And again, this is heavily used for financial management purposes. So the ability to get everybody to report and all of their time contributed, all of their time reported, it really shows a true level of effort against our mission and shows everybody's contribution. So whether you're a frontline reviewer, reviewing new drug applications or reviewing medical device applications, or you're doing administrative support, or you're a manager, or you're doing IT or what have you, we can capture everyone's contribution to the mission, and because everybody's important, and especially this year has really shown us how important all those people that you don't think about, how important their contributions are to our mission. We've also moved off legacy siloed systems. Every center had their own time reporting program, and we're moving into an enterprise time reporting structure, and that allows us to do things like really capture, what's the level of effort against a particular piece of work across FDA, not just within one organization, but as things move around the agency, how are we able to track that and build longitudinal models for reviewing new drugs and things like that. We've also moved off of general time reporting codes in really large buckets to an updated structure, which allows us to actually simplify the reporting for users, for staff that have to put their time in, and also get more and better data around what their level of effort is. So the idea is that by going simpler by going more complicated in our data structure, we've also made it simpler for people to report their time, which is really helpful. So on to the next slide, please. So let's talk a little bit about delivery. One of the things people have talked about is building a data-centric culture and having the right team in place. And so on one hand, we have a small team that's dedicated to this project, this program. And we also have a large community. And I'd like to think of both of them as equally important to delivering the value out of Insight. So it's not just about building the team, it's about building the whole community. I lead a small 4-person central program team that we handle the technical development. We work with our many wonderful contractors. Shout out to all of them, and to manage the application, to build it, to continue to improve it, and to address technical issues as well. Our IT shop, they manage the actual the IT work, the program, the platform that we're on, and they're an integral part of all of our success. And then finally, in the centers and offices, we have, again, small dedicated teams that support the Insight program, but then also a large and extensive community of users that we actually encourage to talk to one another about how they're using Insight, what they're using it for, where is it working, where is it not working? That's really the most critical question that I'm always asking is, where is this not working for you? What's missing? And we've gotten a lot of really good insight out of that, and a lot of really good ideas for improvements that have made time reporting more valuable, not just in terms of time reporting itself, but also in terms of building that data-centric culture at FDA. So on the next slide, just some of the lessons that we've learned. It's interesting. This is time reporting, and it's not the sexiest topic. I'll be blunt about that. I'm sure all of our friends in the contractor community and anybody who's worked in professional services knows what a drudge reporting your time can be. But this is really about quantifying your staff's relationship to their work. And it's really, in a way, it's kind of an intimate process that requires a lot of tact and respect and understanding and empathy as well. And so when we're having conversations with people and people are really concerned about are they reporting their time in a way that shows their level of effort, shows their contribution, we want to make sure that we respect that and that we continue to honor that, and we keep users at the forefront of everything that we do. We try to make everything as easy as you can. And of course, one thing, this was the first really enterprise scale agile, multi-center program, cloud, all those buzzwords, and it requires a complete organizational commitment. We were really fortunate to have an executive sponsor who understood the value of this approach and really backed us up when things got tough. And for anybody out there who's an aspiring executive sponsor, that's the number one thing you can do is back your team when things get hard, and they will get hard. Talk a little bit about contracts. And, on the third bullet, the point I really want us to walk away with this is that, let's be flexible and open. Building and validating data models don't fit within sprints. It just doesn't. And so we need to make sure that we, approach this in an open and flexible manner. Finally, I think I've got about a minute left. So I'm just going to a couple of things here. Change management is really critical. It begins before the beginning and it ends after the ending. And by that, I mean, that should be the first thing you think about and continue to invest in it. It's more than just training and communications. It's about understanding what are the behavioral changes, that 4 changes slide I showed earlier, but then also walking people through the change and continuing to help them to gather value. We spent almost as much money on change management as we have on technical development, and it has always been in the forefront of our thoughts. And that's really important for something you think of as hard data. It's really about making sure that you have the right change in place before you start sending out slides and sending out data and dashboards and so on, because it's a real shock to the system when that data becomes available. Finally, having a strong product owner is essential because a lot of decisions have to be made quickly and a lot of trade-offs have to be made, and having someone who's capable of doing that and empowered to do that is really important for success. So on to the next slide, please. So that's the end of my presentation. I'm open for questions. If I don't get to your questions today, please feel free to email me or find me on LinkedIn, and I'm happy to continue the discussion with you. So back to you, Gina.
Thanks, Sachin. So as we begin to pull questions from the attendees in the chat box, we're going to start with this first question for you, which is something you touched on a little bit, but a common challenge that agencies have, I think, across government is this issue of data silos. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit more about how this has played a role in the time reporting initiative, or it's perhaps other initiatives as well that you've worked on at FDA or elsewhere. And what advice can you give others that are facing some of these data silo challenges?
Sure, thank you, Gina. So yeah, the data silos we're a big issue. When we went to the cloud and we started building this platform-based service, one of the things that we quickly learned is that data is scattered all over the organization. So we ended up building relationships with all of the data owners. And I'll say this, that everybody wanted to help. Everybody was really excited about doing this, about bringing their data, integrating their data into a common platform. And it took a lot to do. And, we were figuring out a lot of things for the first time. We learned, that, we have different data structures, as Ted talked about in his presentation. And we slowly worked through each of them, built consensus, with empathy and understanding. And that's really important because all of a sudden, people who've sort of been used to doing things on their own are now having to work with other people they haven't worked with before. And so building that community and that trust and that empathy is critical. Great.
I think a related but perhaps a little bit more general question, as you were talking during your presentation, I think you were touching on this concept of enterprise solutions versus more decentralized and a federated approach. And I know from my experience at FDA that there's a mix of that. I think Insight time reporting really makes us sound neater and cleaner perhaps than it is under the hood. So can you tell us a little bit about how to scale in a scenario where you have a mix of enterprise approach and this sort of decentralized federated approach?
Sure, that's actually a really good point. I think, a lot of agencies are in the midst of that transition from the federated approach to the central platform as a service, et cetera, approach. And I think it goes back to several things. One is that vision from the leadership on how to, on that we need to make this leap to a modernized platform. And we need to make this leap to thinking about data, not just in terms of how we can use it, but what it can do in ways that we haven't thought about yet. And FDA as a whole is awash in data. We use a lot of data to make our regulatory decisions. And so in a way we have this sort of data-centric culture because everyone's always asking, what's the evidence, whether it's dissolution of generic drugs or something else. And we always we always have to keep in mind that, people want to make good decisions. And, as we start to tie these things together, we need to make sure that, we're doing this in a way that's replicable, it's documented, it adds value, and you're only taking what you need from people, and you're not trying to dump everything into one place and let the user sort it out, but you're really taking the time to bring it all together in a strategic and cohesive manner.
Great. Moving to our next question, again from one of our attendees. Can you talk about challenges in developing and identifying authoritative data sources and encouraging application owners to use them?
Can I talk about this? So yeah, everybody's always looking for the single source of truth. That's always the key. And I spent a lot of time digging around to say, where exactly is this piece of information located in this system? And I always go, if we had to go before our favorite senator, who I won't mention, and we had to say, this is where this piece of information is, is this correct? And it took us a while to identify things, and then at times people would come back and say, well, we have this exception, or we have this, and we would have to say, no, this system is right, and if this system is not right, you need to go fix that system. We're not going to do it. And especially around the roster of people who report time, for us that was the big one. And we have to say that our HR system is correct. If you got a problem, go there. And also for our submission information and things like that, you really have to stand firm and really have to be stubborn about that in order to continue to drive that continuous improvement. Gina?
Yep. And I know from our work together that time tracking serves as a foundation for the resource capacity planning initiative. Can you talk a little bit about what the future looks like when time tracking data is used to its fullest potential?
Sure. In the future, we're looking at a number of different applications for this data. I know it's, whether it's a managerial, tracking where your workload is going. Hopefully we can replace some of the weekly spreadsheets that go around, all the way up to looking at this from a strategic HR function. Where are we likely to need more people in the future? And what's their level of effort going to be? As we add people, what's the marginal productivity going to look like? And how does that affect our ability to continue to stay, in front of innovation? And questions like that, where can we start to see early warning signals that there's a surge in submissions for a particular area? How is that going to affect our staffing? And those are questions that we're only starting to scratch the surface of. And the whole medical products community is really excited to see where this is going to go.
And our final question from an attendee, can you please explain a little bit more about how and why building and validating data models does not necessarily fit into an agile sprint cycle?
Sure. So, data models are funny things, right? That require a lot of validation, a lot of different inputs. And they may not work the first couple of times, or you may go down one approach and then discover that that's wrong, and they have to readjust and rebuild data sources and things like that. And it takes what it takes. And so one of the things that we found very early on is when we tried to use Scrum, and really formal Scrum, which we use for managing the technology, it doesn't necessarily work with the data with the data side. And using that as a guide and using that as a way of making sure that you're iterating and continually improving on what you have is very important. But the idea that you're going to start on day 1 of a sprint and finish by day 21 of a sprint isn't always feasible.
Fantastic. Sachin, thank you so much. Really appreciate your hard work on this project and all of the hard work being done at FDA. Thank you so much. And back to you, Kristina.
Thank you.
Thank you guys so much. That was really interesting. Now I'm actually going to be passing it over to Eric Ewing, an AI Center of Excellence Director at TTS, who's going to moderate a conversation with the U.S. Geological Survey, also known as USGS. Eric, over to you.
Thank you, Kristina. Hi, my name is Eric Ewing. I'm a director with the Artificial Intelligence Center of Excellence. And I'm excited to have this discussion with Charlotte Snow and Jim Kreft, product owners from the Water Resources Mission Area at the United States Geological Survey, or USGS. Charlotte and Jim, would you please introduce yourselves and what you do at USGS briefly?
Sure. Hi, I'm Charlotte Snow, USGS Water Mission Area, and I am product owner in the Web Communications branch.
Hi, I'm Jim Kreft, also at USGS, also a product owner, and I focus on the data, sort of the back-end data infrastructure side of things for our enterprise data access systems.
Great, thank you both for joining us today. So Charlotte, you're doing some amazing work in modernizing your website, making data more easily accessible by the general public, something near and dear to my heart. Could you tell me a bit about what you're achieving with your website modernization?
Sure. First, I'll tell you a little bit about why we're modernizing. The USGS has a long history of data collection and dissemination. Data have been collected at some of our sites for more than 100 years. In fact, our website was the first to deliver near real-time water data over the internet 25 years ago. So over those 25 years, there's been advances in instrumentation and data capture techniques, which have meant we are able to offer many new types of data on our site. And this is great for science, but adding new types of data as they come online has caused our site to evolve in a complicated way. So as we add more and more options to our download form, we actually have made it harder for our users to find and download the data sets they need. So because of all of this, we've set out to modernize and standardize the way we deliver our data. And we've started with small efforts that have had a high impact. We put a lot of effort into the visualization of water data on our hydrographs. Through analytics, we know the majority of our traffic is now coming from mobile users. So the hydrograph was a great place for us to start. It's prominent on the page, and most users get the information they want from it without having to click around much. As for users looking to go more into depth with our data and actually download it, we've increasingly seen the scientific community move their data analytics into Python and R. So we're developing packages that allow them to get to our data that way too. And we know this modernization is setting us up for future growth in data, making data of many types, some that aren't even available yet, more findable if we begin to provide the infrastructure now. So our overall goal is to get the water data to the users in a way that makes sense to them.
Great, that's very, very interesting. And Jim, have you had to change your data infrastructure and systems to be able to serve the data publicly up on the website?
Absolutely. So interesting. So the USGS has been pioneering in serving the water data. As Charlotte mentioned, we were actually one of the first 300 websites on the World Wide Web as it launched. And it's always been our data. We've also been we had our underlying data management tooling back starting in the 60s was always considered state of the art. The only challenge was that our state of the art kind of got stuck in about the 80s. But at the same time, we know that our data has always been for public consumption, and that things like fundamental science practices, providing really high quality, well-reviewed data has been a central part of what we've always wanted to do. We've always done. USGS data is always considered the gold standard for water data. We have more data than anyone else, and it's better than anybody else's. And that's led to millions and millions of visits every year. Hundreds, if not thousands of different systems depend on the data that we collect and pull out of our existing APIs. And that's fantastic. But at the same time, now we're starting to confront 30 years of organic growth in our data and our systems, and bits and pieces were bolted onto the side of these different, of the larger system. And we've got lots of things of technical debt and legacy languages, legacy systems, lots of Perl, lots of big on-premise servers to do things. And that's hitting new challenges, which we'll talk about more. And when we're looking at trying to make our data accessible, not just to water professionals, but really to the public, we're starting to hit new challenges. And so that's combined, and because of this level of technical debt that we have, it's making the ability to respond to changes in how our data is being accessed and used and new users, making it much, much harder. So as part of a larger modernization project in all of our USGS water systems, we're building a redesign of our data architecture. We're really stepping back and asking looking at our file formats. And a lot of them were based on legacy formats that often sometimes dated all the way to punch cards. And we're trying to move away from things like cryptic codes. Instead of writing ST and telling a user to have to run over and find out somewhere else what ST means, we'll just be writing stream. This is a site on a stream. We're trying to move to standards, working with a group. The USGS is part of the Open Geospatial Consortium, so we can build data that's interoperable, that we can work with our cross-border partners and with the Europeans and both share knowledge and make our data more useful as people are trying to answer national, continental, and global water questions. We're trying to put our information in hydrologic context. So we're measuring data, and we put that data on a site. Yes, it's a monitoring location, but really it's monitoring data on a river, on a lake, in an estuary. And we're trying to make it more clear and easier for people to understand that this is data, but the information gets us is about this place in the landscape. We've done a lot of user research recently as we're working with 18F, and one of the things we've found is that we've always thought about the way our data is accessed by different types of professions, say a hydrologist, a regulator, a academic scientist. But instead, we really need to think about, instead of what their job is, how are they using and accessing the data? And so think about people who are exploring and downloading our data versus those who are just dropping in to check a status of a specific thing and pulling out, or maybe they're building tools, operational tools against our APIs. The other thing is we know that we can't keep our current technical infrastructure. We need to move to cloud native and event-driven architectures that can scale to meet future needs. And think about things like developer experience. So self-documenting APIs, and also building things like clients, so that say a developer in R can just pull a client from CRAN and go. So that's been a lot of the different things we're doing. We've got a long ways to go, but we're also pretty excited about where we are.
Yeah, that sounds great. And I think we have some questions that Charlotte will be able to dive in on that, talk a little bit more about that. Charlotte, what have you seen as the biggest successes in modernizing the USGS's website's user experience?
Well, our users are really talking to us now. On the modernized sites, we get a lot of meaningful feedback. It's not just, I don't like this, I can't find what I want. It's very specific. So the users are interacting more on the modernized sites, presumably because they're easier to interact with. So the feedback has more details about those really specific interactions. For instance, we're learning tons about how people manipulate the hydrographs. So we have a better idea of what their needs are for those. And we kind of have this external justification for feature development that's truly rooted in our user research. It's not just us guessing at what might be useful to them. So that has been huge for us.
Awesome. And Jim, how have you solved for the challenge of bringing in large amounts of data, of new types of data, from rapidly increasing numbers of collection points?
We haven't yet. We're working on it. So there's a reality that we are, there's a whole congressional line item around building the next generation water observing systems. And that's leading to more locations, more kinds of locations, more data and more data collected at those locations. And so we've got more places, and also they're more closely related. There's a lot more relations to each other. So there may be one point and a dozen places around that point that are actually where we're actually collecting the data. And so, or we have, this is the place where we launch a drone and the drone goes and gets data, or we put out UAVs, things that move. And so one of the things that we're doing is we're figuring out what types of metadata we need to more effectively present this information and manage it, and feeding that back to the transactional systems so that metadata, which needs to be really collected as the data, as close to the field as possible. When our scientists and hydrologists are going out and collecting that data, we need to be able to get that type of metadata that's critical for presentation put in so we can present it. We also know that we have to do a lot more visual of user research, because the more points we have on a map and trying to show users what's going on, the more sophisticated our user interface needs to become to present ever more complex data. From a tech perspective, we need to be able to move more, as I mentioned, to scalable and event-driven tooling so that we don't have to constantly reload things, but know what changed as we pull from our transactional systems. And try to build toward not just a coherent front end, but a coherent data story as well. So we have to see all the different data that we have and make it so that as a data user, also people can see what's going on, and that will allow for the front end to and our overall user experience to be much stronger and richer and more effective.
Yeah, that's great. And I love that everyone on the panel has discussed user experience being sort of a central feature of progress and what you're trying to do at USGS. So at this point, I think we can move to questions from the audience. So audience members, feel free to drop additional questions in the chat, but I think we've got some excited audience members already posed some questions. So this first one I'll put to you, Charlotte. How are you managing and using data from citizen scientists? And are you recommending data standards? Do you provide metadata to document data quality?
I think Jim could actually tackle this one a little better. I have been at the USGS for only 1 year and have not worked much with the citizen scientist data.
Citizen science is an area that we're trying to figure out more about how to effectively bring our citizen science data or community science data together with the data that we're collecting, and figuring out ways to do that, and not just things like citizen science, but also data collected by all sorts of different agencies. There's thousands of agencies across the United States that collect water data. And we work on systems like the National Groundwater Monitoring Network and the National Water Quality Portal to be able to build systems that integrate not just our data, but data from many other places. Things like standards make it far more possible to do things like that.
Really neat, really neat. And Charlotte, I want to go back to user experience again. In doing some of your user research, what data? How did you find out what data people want to see published, and what the challenges and opportunities are with that data?
Yeah, well, we're pretty fortunate that our data is high quality and high value. So people are pretty dedicated and motivated to find it on our site, but we know even the super users can't find it all. So we knew for our user research, we really needed to target those types of people. And our research was based, before this 18F effort, we had one persona, and it was Harry Hydrologist. And after talking to 50 some odd users, we realized we had it wrong there. We wanted to, well, we knew we needed to change the way we categorize our users. And Jim kind of mentioned, it's not what they do for a living, it's the type of use they want out of the data. So it's how they're using the data. Do they want a quick stream temperature value, or do they want 30 years of data? The professional category they fall into is not what we should be designing for. We should be designing for the data use for our data delivery. One of the challenges is that not all of our data is clean or universally standard. So as I mentioned, we've taken data over a long, long period of time, and the data could have been taken in many ways and recorded differently. So some of those differences occur between geographies. So sometimes our users struggle to use data at regional or national levels. So going forward, we're excited to learn more from our user-centered research and continually incorporate it into the workflow.
Great, great. And this one may be, again, for Jim, but can you talk a little bit more about your data standardization efforts and if you've had any pushback and what that pushback's looked like?
Yeah, so I'm going to so there has been certainly pushback. The biggest challenge sometimes is when people have tools that they've built against our sort of unique and somewhat proprietary data formats, and those tools, they don't want to change them, or they can't change them. And it's going to be one of our big challenges with retiring older systems. One of the things that we've seen with this other tool called Water Quality Portal that I've been responsible for is by building high quality systems, that value that people get from the standard-based systems can really knock down the opposition. We've had organizations that start pulling data from one of our systems and say, hey, our data it looks terrible, and that's because and then we're like, yeah, because that's the way that you sent it to us. But then they'll resubmit 40 years worth of data so that they can take advantage of community tools that have been built against those standards to use for their own data. And that type of thing is really how we can build adoption and get past that. We have to make changes is to build those high quality tools and make sure that the data, when the new data structures are highly useful to downstream users.
Really cool. And here's our last question for this section. And I think I'm going to direct this towards Charlotte. What criteria do you use for choosing data sets to put on the website, if any at all? And could you discuss that a little bit?
Yes, so we have some back-end needs that kind of govern how we can present the data. So we are working to get many more types of data available, but it is not always the easiest way to go about them. We're also working on updating our APIs as we go forward, and hope to get everything up there in a good amount of time.
Great, great. So I want to thank everyone in the audience for their questions, and Charlotte and Jim, thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today about the website modernization at USGS. It's really neat. It's really neat. So now I'll hand it back to Kristina. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you all so much. Next, we will hear from Denise Kitts, who is the Chief Data and Technology Officer at the Office of Information and Technology, OIANT, at the U.S. Department of Veteran Affairs, and Alexandra Porter will be joining us to moderate the Q&A portion after Denise's talk. Denise, over to you.
Sure, thanks, Kristina. Thanks for the opportunity to present in today's TTS. So as Kristina said, my name is Denise Kitts, and I'm currently in the role of the Chief Data Technology Officer at VA. So I'm really excited about the current activities within VA and the kind of renewed focus on data. We're really taking a hard look at the current environment and what maturity we have around enterprise data management, data analytics capabilities, and really what's needed in the department to modernize and really treat data as a strategic asset. We've also, I say recently, but about a year ago, we hired our new Chief Data Officer, Shamendra Paul, who's really leading the charge in modernizing what we're doing in space. We've recently, OINT and the CDO have recently collaborated on a new data and analytics strategy. And it's, I think it's pretty unique. When I look at data strategies across the government, it's really looking at not just how we think about enterprise data management, culture, technology, but it's also, it's very, very focused in on how do you choose where to spend your energy, around key analytical questions, key mission areas. And, so I think that strategy is both tactical, it's strategic and tactical at the same time, which is, I think, really going to benefit the department as we move out. So in today's discussion, I wanted to provide a high-level overview of an effort we call Rockies, which is really good. It's foundational, to our new data and analytics strategy in terms of, how we look to modernize data analytics. So next slide. So Rockies is an enterprise data analytics platform. Really, if you think about, VA has been doing data analytics at, very wide scope of data analytics across the department. We've got lots of different systems. And I heard, there's been a lot of talk on today's discussion about silos. We're right up there with many, many silos around data analytics. But, really what we lacked was a really mature, modern data analytics platform in-house that could really enable evidence-based decision-making. VA and our leadership is very, very focused on driving with data, and then quickly having access to insights and pushing those insights to the front line for action. Whether collecting insights and pushing it to patient advocates, mental health providers, frontline caregivers. So it's really about using data, not just for evidence-based decision-making around policy, but really driving action in the front line. And improving the health outcomes of our veterans and families. And then when you think about it from a taxpayer perspective, again, we mentioned the fact that we have many people said that they have a number of silos. We have, lots of different efforts in data analytics that are program-based. And what we're after is understanding the veteran's journey. And that journey goes across, those moments that matter in the journey involve lots of different services that VA is delivering, and even folks external to VA are delivering to veterans. And so we really needed a platform that could help us integrate data from lots of different programs. And then lastly, I think, looking for opportunities for eventually a convergence of the platforms, where it makes sense from a technology standpoint, a mission standpoint, from a cost perspective. Once we build out the Rockies platform, we'll be looking for opportunities for convergence. So next slide. So, so how do we deliver on the mission? So, Rockies is going to be it is a multi-year effort to really build out an advanced data and analytics platform within VA, bringing in modern analytic tools, high availability, high computing power. VA has been limited in terms of we have a number of use cases, especially in the clinical space, where we really needed the high computing power to work on data sets that have billions and billions of rows that we needed to compute in a matter of minutes in order to really deliver on the outcome that we were looking for. And we've made use of external capabilities to deliver on some of those type of use cases, but the demand is just really growing, which kind of led us down this path of building out Rockies and as an in-house solution with modern native cloud capabilities. So let's see, what else do I want to say about this? So the platform will end up supporting various user groups. Again, I mentioned that we have a chief data officer who's very, very focused on maturing enterprise data management for the department. So, Rockies will play a role in helping mature out enterprise data management. But ultimately, its initial focus will be on system curation, organization of the data, integration of the data, and following, using industry standards. So next slide, please. So how do we get started? And this Rockies is a recent effort. This is where I have to do a shout out to the PIFs, Presidential Innovation Fellow Wame U, A lot of times in VA, we have great ideas, but we can't quite bring them to market. And this is where folks that like the PIFs come on board and kind of give us that shot of energy and innovation that we need. So we've been thinking about this for a while, but in terms of like really moving it out and building out Rockies, I would say it's probably been in earnest over the last 6 months. So we started, I've heard a number of people talk about, focusing on a user and human-centered design. So we started out by interviewing dozens of stakeholders, trying to understand what was working, what wasn't working, what were kind of the hidden needs. And then based on what we heard, we built out a reference architecture that consisted of dozens of, capabilities that ultimately would deliver on a, futuristic data analytics platform. But we wanted to, focus in on some initial use cases to start building out those capabilities. So it's very similar to the approach we took with our VA.gov platform. You may or not be familiar with that. VA went through a modern digital modernization effort where we consolidated a number of websites. We produced a digital platform for VA.gov and pushed everything into that platform. But I think we were really successful because we took an incremental approach and we used high priority use cases to build out VA.gov. So we're taking that same approach with Rockies, where we're not trying to build the ocean. We didn't take everything in the reference architecture and try to build it all out at once. We took some high priority use cases and started to deliver on things that we thought were foundational for the platform. So I'm not going to read through all of these, but I think it's within the last 6 years, we've leveraged native cloud environment. We deployed a zone organized data lake that's already exceeding 3 billion rows. Our initial use case was this medication possession ratio. And this is one of those use cases that we didn't have the horsepower, in-house. No matter if we scaled out or we scaled up. It was something that we couldn't do. We couldn't look at all patients. We couldn't look at all medications. We definitely couldn't look at anything over any sort of time duration that was meaningful. So this was the first use case that we tackled. And this is something that we couldn't do, period. It wasn't like we just shortened the time. It was something we didn't have the capability to do. But we digested over 3 billion rows of data for all patients over an 8-year period to look at all medications, and we're able to compute that in 15 minutes. And why that's important, what this use case really delivers on is it's really about understanding whether veterans are taking their meds. And then, our end user for this was the Office of Mental Health. And this was one of the things that they determined was a real important risk factor to try to understand. And they struggled with being able to do that in a timely fashion. So we're really excited about what we were able to do with this new modern platform and provide this information, these insights out to the front line, the people that are delivering care to our veterans. We also, anytime you stand up a platform, the initial focus was also about data and making sure we had role-based access as we built out the zone organized data lake. Again, the user experience, we talked a lot about that today, and making sure that this was something that was easy to use for our data scientists and our analysts. And then obviously, we're working with clinical data and making sure that we could quickly get to a FedRAMP high for a platform as a service within the VA's cloud was another thing that we accomplished over the last 3 months. And I think the last bullet on here is that part of the vision we have for this platform as VA's data lake is to be the provider of data to other analytics platforms. So other SaaS platforms, it could be Informatica, it could be Palantir, insert vendor name here. But the idea is that Rockies would be an in-house solution, curating the data, providing that data lake for our SaaS solutions that we might bolt on for various reasons. So next slide, please. So I mentioned earlier that VA is really focused on using data to derive insights. So we use this framework as a way to show the life cycle of data, the capturing of the data, the organization of the data, the analytics, the visualization of the data, driving decision and action. And then it's really cyclical because as you drive decision and actions, you're creating additional data that gets fed back in. So we, as a platform, Rockies is focused on the bottom two blocks around the organization of the data and empowering the analysis. So it's probably best, maybe it's probably best to talk about this in more detail on the next slide. So if we could go to the next slide, please. So this is what we call our solution architecture for IOC. So I mentioned earlier that we interviewed a bunch of stakeholders. We built out a reference architecture that had dozens and dozens of capabilities in it, but we were building out it in incremental fashion. So this is a representation of the solution architecture for IOC. So we leveraged the native cloud technologies from Microsoft Azure, such as the Data Factory for organization, Databricks for enrichment, Synapse for storing, Power BI for presentation. And it was very important, as I mentioned earlier about security, it was really important that we layered in the appropriate security across the bottom to support governance and appropriate access and data stewardship and logging and everything. And so we were, VA was lucky, we had an instantiation of this security, I guess, shared service in our premise-based data analytics environment. We were able to leverage that, pull it up to the cloud, and make some improvements for finer grain access. So while CDW, so what you don't see on this slide as part of IOC is enterprise data management capabilities, such as metadata, data quality. And I mentioned earlier that we're working very, very closely with the chief data officer, and there's a big push around maturing enterprise data management. So what we hope to focus on in the very near future is kind of building out that layer of capabilities for the enterprise data management. When we did IOC, we had some basic capabilities around metadata management, but really what we're looking for the platform is to be the enterprise, to provide enterprise data management capabilities around metadata management, and then interoperability with, because we currently live in a heterogeneous environment and will probably stay heterogeneous for some time. The other thing the platform will focus on is kind of interoperability with other things that are doing data management, metadata management, all based on standards. So we're really excited. We just hit IOC. Couldn't have done it without our Presidential Innovation Fellows, and just excited for what the future may hold. So I think that might be it in terms of slides. Great.
Denise, thank you so much. Really interesting talk, and it's fantastic to hear, about the successes of this platform. One quick request when we get into Q&A. Denise, would you mind turning your video on just for the Q&A portion? Now that we have the deck on. Thank you so much. All right. So just a reminder for folks to put their questions in the chat, and we'll get to as many as possible. Starting with our first question, audience question. So more bigger picture, how do you ensure data privacy in this area of health and this scale enterprise-wide?
Yep, great. And then I wanted to know if is Wame U also on the call? My partner in crime?
I believe so.
Okay, no worries. So in terms of data privacy is such a, I think the way we do it, the way we've done it and the way we plan to do it is, and I'm assuming when you say data privacy, we're talking about making sure the right people have access to the right data at the right time. And so it's, we have a really robust program in place that's a combination of technology and process and governance. And it, we closely monitor all requests, and we have data stewards for all authoritative data. So, it's very much focused on a domain of data. If you're requesting access to a particular domain of data, it's a process that you go through. It sounds a little cumbersome, it sounds a little bureaucratic, but in terms of privacy, we take it pretty serious in terms of access to data. So it's a combination of people, process, and technology that is been tried. It's been tried over time in our current premise-based environments, and it's worked out really well. Okay. Do you notify or otherwise make, I'm just looking at the question in the chat. Do you notify or otherwise make available to veterans information about who, when, how their data is accessed? Yes. So all of our systems have a system of record, and I'm sure most people in the federal government are familiar with that, but we have to notify veterans when we're storing their data and how their data is being used. And so same thing with analytics platforms. We adhere to, system of record notifications. And I see Wame.
Okay, great. And Denise, unfortunately, we're running out of time, so so I think we are going to shift over. But I just want to say thank you so much for your time. And this is a fantastic talk. And the challenges of rolling out an analytics platform, I know that there are a lot of challenges that go into that in terms of buy-in and governance and all that. So it's been really great to hear about these successes. So really, really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
And Kristina, I'm going to go ahead and kick it back over to you.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much, Denise. That was really interesting. Now we have one more section of the event, and I'm going to be passing it over to Brian Lane, a director of the AI Center of Excellence at TTS, who will be introducing our next speaker. Brian, over to you.
Thank you so much. I just want to say I'm so excited and happy to have my dear friend and colleague, Dr. Marcus Cometer, join us today to talk through data management and the DoD's Joint Artificial Intelligence Center. Dr. Cometer received his PhD in computer science from Harvard University. He also holds a master's in computer science and an AB in computer science and statistics from Harvard. Dr. Cometer's research focuses on artificial intelligence, machine learning, cybersecurity, and wireless networking with a focus on 5G wireless networks. He's supremely qualified to lead the JAIC in his position as the chief for data science and AI development. And I'm very happy to have him here. Before we dive into our first couple of questions, I want to give just a little bit of context on the JAIC as an organization. So the JAIC is unique in that it is just a little bit over 2 years old. The JAIC acts as a technology accelerator for AI adoption in the Department of Defense, but they also have two other tenets in which they operate. The second one being as a enabling platform and scaling solution for the department, and then the third is the function of a department-wide coordinator and understanding who in the Department of Defense is working on what and how to measure performance as we try and achieve our goals to meet the national defense strategy and the AI strategies put forth by the federal government. So that's a huge mission area. And you know, we don't have slides today, but we are going to regale the attendees with some of the adventures of building an organization to take on a task at this scale. And so with that, I'm going to throw my first question over to Marcus and ask, what are some of the ways that JAIC is creating a high-performing data organization to meet these tenets?
Well, Brian, first of all, thank you so much for having me. It's an absolute honor to be here with you today, so thank you so much. We're very excited about the mission of the JAIC and how we approach some of the data preparation and artificial intelligence aspects of the problems that the JAIC works on. So, you know, as we look towards transforming the Department of Defense through AI, we try to really take a holistic approach across the entire AI development pipeline. And when I say holistic and entire, I do mean a very, very broad view through a lot of the work that we've done. And I think that it's important to highlight that, you know, even when we talk about artificial intelligence, you know, everybody tends to get excited about, you know, neural networks or the latest algorithm that, you know, has come off the pipeline. The success of these systems, when we put them into practice, is really determined by the data preparation that we do before. And a lot of times it's even, you know, starts before we get any technical people involved in the product development process. So it really starts with how we prepare our data, continues through how we govern our data, and then finally how we use our data. So to make this a little bit concrete, I'll talk about some of the aspects that we've been working on together kind of in these three areas. So first, for how we starting with preparing the data, we've been working on creating acquisition vehicles that are going to comprehensively enable the department to prepare their data for AI. And I think this is something that we'll talk about in detail a little bit more in a few minutes, so I won't go too much into detail. But the idea here is we want to create the acquisition vehicles that we can give to other Department of Defense components so that they can order against the types of services that they need to prepare their data. So when they take in large amounts of data that they're collecting to build up their eventual AI platform or system, we want them to be able to get it ready, to be able to label that data, prepare it, secure that data. And really, what that allows us to do is, because we're starting at this kind of acquisition level, it allows us to start taking steps towards getting some synchronization benefits, starting to help the department say, we don't want to do this data preparation in a one-off manner, on a case-by-case basis. We want to start doing things, as you said, bringing this into our common platforms so that we get data reusability, data traceability, data discoverability, so that other components can leverage the work that's done when one person prepares a data set. Second thing is, after we've created, a high value data set using, for example, this acquisition vehicle, or if the DoD component just, creates a great data set, we want to make sure that we're governing it correctly. So what we've had set up at the JAIC is a data governance council, which basically is a governing body that allows us to enforce some common governance structures around data. It's easy to kind of get into this gold rush mentality. We just want to grab all of the data and bring it into our infrastructure. But what this Data Governance Council allows us to do is to make sure that we have things like where that data came from, how it was prepared, who is the authoritative owner of this data, all of those types of things really written down, vetted and institutionalized, so that data is not just going to be useful for, it's one current use, but it's going to continue to be useful and traceable in the future. And this also kind of allows us to really, deal with some of the competing demands that we have on our activities at the JAIC, which are things like adhering to the DoD set of AI ethical principles. We have to make sure that our AI systems are traceable and are explainable, and all of these other things. And all of being able to have AI ethics and AI security, it really starts at the data preparation, which is a key part that the Data Governance Council is able to enforce and start institutionalizing throughout the JAIC and broadly to the DoD. And finally, now that we have data created, we have it governed, we also want to make sure that it's discoverable to the whole department. It's not like the academic space where these great data sets exist that we can just grab off the shelf and use. We have to do things like create really tough data sets for very difficult domains that are difficult to prepare and get data in. So after we do all that work, we want to make sure that we get the maximum visibility for that across the department, so that when the next component has to address a similar issue, they don't have to start with data preparation collection at step 0. They can leverage existing data sets. And that's some of the work that we're doing with our joint common foundation partners at the JAIC to be able to make sure that that type of data is discoverable, and reusable to other aspects. And we try, whenever possible, to make sure all of those different efforts really interlock with one another, so that data, created off of that acquisition vehicle can flow into the joint common foundation when needed, to make sure, we're getting these maximum, reuse benefits throughout the department.
Thank you so much for sharing. You really covered quite a bit of information. I want to dig a little bit deeper into a couple things though. We talked a little bit about the breadth of the mission of the JAIC from an organizational point of view, but inside the JAIC we have these mission initiatives, and they cover everything from cybersecurity to healthcare and everything in between. So the JAIC as an organization has to be able to support a broad range of use cases and a broad range of types of data. So you and I talk about this all the time, data readiness, data preparation. Can you talk us through a little bit about what these data readiness efforts encompass and how you plan to support such a broad range of data sets?
Absolutely. So the success of AI, we know is going to be limited by the quality of the data coming in here. And there's a tenet in AI, as it is across a lot of other data-driven fields, of garbage in, garbage out. So we need to make sure that we're getting the highest quality data. And as you said, when we're working across on a daily basis, healthcare, signal data, imagery data, text data. It's very easy to kind of get off into just doing things in one-off settings without, focusing on the scale and reusability of these data sets that are going to really determine the success of being able to transform the department rather than just building one or two one-off AI applications. So when we look towards data readiness, we say, how can we prepare our data in ways that the AI algorithms can actually utilize it? Part of this is dealing with creating the best practices that will be able to scale, creating these AI-ready data sets in the future. So, the DoD has specific domain problems. For example, having to, work with full motion video and large quantities of full motion video. These types of problems are things that are really unique to the department in a lot of ways. And when we create these data sets and we figure out what works well, we need to institutionalize that so that when the next person tries to solve that same problem, we can do that, quickly without having to kind of reinvent the wheel every time. And what goes beyond just creating the data sets also is looking to support the other competing needs that these AI systems must fulfill. So, at a core, the AI systems have a job to fulfill, but as we mentioned before, they also have to operate ethically. These are targets for attack, so they have to operate securely. And a lot of these processes, making sure that the AI systems are explainable, or ethical, or traceable, or secure, this all starts when we create the data set. When we get that data ready for AI, we need to make sure that, data that we're including in training these systems hasn't been poisoned. So we need data security. We need to make sure, for example, it's been anonymized, because we need to make sure that if we're working on health data, for example, when we put a, AI model out in the field, there's ways that you can kind of, tinker out the data that was used to train that system. So we have to make sure that data that goes into these systems has been sufficiently anonymized, that we're, protecting everybody's data that we're collecting, that we're the stewards of. So really, we try to start all of these processes at the data readiness step, rather than just thinking we're going to grab all this data and start developing and training models and then try to deal with it afterwards. So really taking that proactive stance helps us a lot in addressing these challenging problems.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you touched on a number of things here. AI ethics, responsible use of AI, preparing data, having a lineage or an evidence chain of what you've done to the data as it moves throughout the life cycle is incredibly important. And I think we have time for one more question, and then we'll wrap up. But can you tell us a little bit about how this standardized acquisition vehicle for data readiness can be a benefit to not only the DoD but the entire federal government?
Absolutely. So, one of the issues is that JAIC doesn't exist in a vacuum. It exists to support all the rest of the department. And, to the best efforts, we're working on really difficult problems here. And we hope that those efforts are going to be valuable to the rest of the federal government as well. So when we work on things like making sure that your data has been securely collected, making sure that it's been anonymized, dealing with the problem of it's always very difficult to collect and to label data. So if we can start bringing in the data preparation phase, for example, generating synthetic data to, augment the limited amounts of data set you have to either save you money or time or make your algorithms better. These are all, skill sets and principles that we're working on in extremely challenging environments. And the lessons, the practices, the tools, the acquisition vehicles, all of these different platforms are things that, even though they're developed in a defense context, would be extremely valuable to, all other federal uses of artificial intelligence. So we're hoping when we create things like this, for example, the acquisition vehicle for, making your data ready for AI systems, we've designed that really with the technical lens of what are going to be the issues today in getting that data ready, what are going to be, these very, very critical areas of emerging concern in the future, a few years from now, like security, like anonymization, those sorts of things, making sure those are all kind of comprehensively included within that document, and then packaging that up in a way that it has broad applicability across not just defense applications, but full federal applications as well. So we really hope that we'll be able to enable the rest of the federal government to leverage some of the work and the lessons that we're doing in this area, so that hopefully this will provide value to everybody's data and AI applications, and not just be siloed within one area.
I love that, and I'm going to add two more things that I get really excited about when I think about standardized acquisition for data readiness as it relates to AI. The first one is changing the incentive structure around AI, because for probably 2 decades now, it's been driven by commercial interests and a profit motive. And now we have an opportunity to leverage AI for good and to do service to the public and to protect our nation, which I think is incredibly important. And the second thing is to build the industrial base and to expand our industrial capabilities to create and harness the power of AI and continue to help America be competitive as a nation, which also is incredibly important, not just for national security, but also for our national prosperity. So with that, Marcus, thank you so much. It's always a pleasure to speak with you. I really have enjoyed, the last year we've been collaborating on our activities at the Jake together. I really appreciate the time. And with that, Kristina, I will kick it back to you.
Thank you so much, Brian.
Thank you both, guys. I really enjoyed that. Now I'm going to get back to Alexandra Porter for some closing thoughts on the event.
Thank you again, Kristina, and thank you all for attending. Thanks to our speakers and panelists, and hopefully you were able to gain new perspectives related to data and analytics optimization. So for additional guidance, we actually have some resources that we'll be dropping in the chat, such as a few useful playbooks and info to our communities of practice. I know that data and analytics covers a very broad spectrum across the enterprise. And I think we touched on some best practices here today that we hope that you'll take back to your agencies. But if you have more questions and you'd like to connect further, please feel free to contact Rebecca McBride at ttsinfo@gsa.gov. Take a few minutes to complete our feedback survey. The link is being dropped in the chat as we speak and will be sent out post-event as well. We hope you will join us for our next event on the topic of identity, which will be taking place on Thursday at 3 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Again, thank you so much for all the participation and collaboration, and I hope everyone enjoys the rest of their day.